Hear this, for it is a tale of the Earth's memory and the terrible price of forgetting. In the newly charted, brutal ridges of the Western Appalachian Territory, where the faint border lines drawn by the Land Commission were swallowed by granite and moss, there was a forest unlike any other. The Pioneer families called the dominion the Old Timber Ridge, and they knew, through inherited dread, that the ridge demanded a price for every trespass. In the brittle autumn of 1888, a man arrived whom they called the Surveyor. He was sent by the distant state to audit the massive acquisitions of timber companies, carrying only a heavy brass compass, a chain-link measure, and a heart that believed fiercely in the cold logic of geometry. What the Surveyor discovered, buried beneath layers of conflicting pioneer claims, was a pattern etched in the deep history of sin. He found maps left by the defunct Black Peak Syndicate, the powerful entity that, 6 decades prior, had built their fortune on the ridge. Among the straight, logical routes, he noticed one offense to professional certainty, Trail 17, a line that twisted and bent where it should have been perfectly straight. Across the life of the syndicate, 5 specific locations along Trail 17 were marked and then violently crossed out, representing 5 chilling periods of unexplained loss. The rhythm of the loss was the most terrifying thing. Every time a cycle of 3 times 6 completed, every 17 years, the Old Timber Ridge would swallow 1 or 2 souls within the radius of that single, crooked trail. When the Surveyor began asking questions in the nearest settlement, Harrow Valley, he was met with the specific, impenetrable defense of the frontier, absolute, polite silence. The local people told him, "The Lord takes what he wishes here, mister. Best not to measure God's ground." Yet, his cold numbers told a different story. He found records proving that following a major fire, the Black Peak Syndicate received an enormous federal payout meant to correct the damage. The money had been claimed, but the illegal path, Trail 17, had been left deliberately intact. He finally unearthed a desperate confession left by the original founder, the patriarch, in a hidden ledger. The entry spoke of a terrible bargain. The land, wronged by the chaotic theft of its resources, demanded a geometric admission of the original sin, enforced by the continued existence of the trail of transgression. The patriarch had entered a profound silent covenant with the elders. They would enjoy perpetual wealth, but every 17 years, they had to allow the land to collect a human sacrifice on that exact, forbidden site. Trail 17 was not a path. It was a line of sin carved by greed. The Surveyor realized he was witnessing the exact moment the Old Timber Ridge came to collect its next exaction. The forest had whispered, and it was waiting for its next, inevitable victim. The Surveyor now understood the nature of the evil. It was perfectly ordered and rational. He knew he could not defeat the silent covenant. His battle must be fought against the disorder that the land itself abhorred. His search for truth led him to the isolated cabin of the weaver, the only person who remembered the true, unwritten terms of the bargain. "I know what you seek, Surveyor," she rasped. "You seek to measure your way out of the debt. But the debt is the order itself. You can only break the cycle if you correct the chaos that birthed it." The weaver confirmed that the ridge demanded geometric truth. "We committed the sin of imprecision," she explained. "We placed Trail 17 where the true line should have run. The land demands an ordered sacrifice to acknowledge the sin. The forest wants you to certify the truth and restore the measure." The Surveyor realized he was a penitent seeking atonement. To break the cycle, he had to perform 2 acts: physically destroy the lie of the illegal trail, and create a new, true record of the cost, sanctioned by his own ultimate commitment. With the heavy winter snow beginning to blanket the mountains, the Surveyor returned to Trail 17. His tools were now his instruments of penance. His task was meticulous and grueling. He had to physically log the path, tearing out the illegal markers and using his measuring chains to meticulously remark the true, legal boundary line. He reached the final spot marked on the old maps. He knew the 17-year cycle was reaching its absolute, final hour. He felt the overwhelming, crushing presence of the forest's order descend upon him, demanding the exaction. The Surveyor knew he could not stop the demand, but he could change the currency. He pulled out his final field journal. He tore out the only documents that mattered to his modern identity: his commission papers, his travel authorization, and his personal silver locket, all the proof of his personal history and chaos. He took the rusted spikes and chains of the illegal markers and meticulously laid them in a precise, geometric 17-sided shape on the frozen ground. In the perfect center of that shape, he placed his journal and his torn personal effects. Then, the surveyor did the final, sacrificial act. He wrapped his chain around the last stump of the illegal path and began to pull and hack, creating a permanent, raw, gaping hole in the earth. He buried his personal identity under the upturned, frozen soil. The old timber ridge accepted the final reckoning. It was the perfect, structured destruction of the evidence of the crime and the complete sacrifice of the personal memory of the one who corrected it. In the cold, muddy spring of 1889, the surveyor was discovered. He spoke with an unnerving, perfect clarity about the land's coordinates and the syndicate's fraud. But when asked his own name or any detail about his past, he could offer only a pew, terrifying void. He was a being of pew function. Harrow Valley watched his return. They saw the price he paid, the sacrifice of his own soul, and they saw the terrible success of his act. He had absolved them. The land commission, utterly confused, dismissed him. The surveyor, stripped of all personal ties, was placed in a distant infirmary. The physical evidence was undeniable. Trail 17 was gone. The chaos had been destroyed, replaced by order. The land's demand for a recurring sacrifice ceased. But the price was the entire framework of the community's shared guilt. Harrow Valley did not lose its money immediately, but it lost its collective spirit. The town realized that the unpaid debt of their original crimes suddenly loomed, unacknowledged and unforgiven. The descendants of the Black Peak Syndicate began to turn on each other, arguing bitterly over inherited assets. The settlement did not collapse dramatically. It simply began to wither. Prosperity remained, but the vitality of the communal secret was gone. The younger generations began to leave for the burgeoning cities, unwilling to live in a place that was merely the perfect geometric solution to an ancient crime. Today, the ridge is silent. The 17-year cycle never returned. The forest is quieter, its order utterly restored. But if you are a surveyor, you can still find the evidence left by the surveyor. If you hike deep into the ridge, you will find a small, unnatural hollow in the earth where Trail 17 once ran. And if you dig there, you might find the rusted remnants of the illegal markers and chains, fused into a single, complicated 17-sided mass, buried under the restored, silent soil, a tombstone for the town's original sin. And the silence of Harrow Valley is different now. It is no longer the strong, defiant silence of a town protecting a secret. It is the weak, hollow silence of a place that has been absolved of its sin, but not its shame. The surveyor, the man who knew everything about the land but nothing about himself, paid the ultimate exaction to prove a point: that some ancient evils are not defeated by passion, but by perfect, meticulous obedience to the rules of order that they themselves impose. The surveyor now understood the nature of the evil. It was perfectly ordered and rational. He knew he could not defeat a whole settlement whose peace had been bought with 4 generations of complicity. His battle, he realized, must be fought against the disorder that the land itself abhorred. His search for truth led him to the far edges of the settlement, past the rough-hewn cabins and the polite, empty stares of the Harrow Valley families. He sought out the only person who did not participate in the stillness. He found the isolated, low-slung cabin of the weaver, a woman so ancient she seemed to predate the syndicate itself. She was said to be the last living voice connected to the original founder, the patriarch, the only one who remembered the true, unwritten terms of the bargain. The surveyor climbed the rugged, ice-glazed track in the bitter cold. He found the weaver seated in a rough wooden chair, her back to him, staring into the immense, unyielding darkness of the woods. She did not flinch at the sound of his heavy leather boots. "I know what you seek, surveyor," she rasped, her voice thin and dry as bark stripped by the sun. "You seek to measure your way out of the debt. But the debt is the order itself. You can only break the cycle if you correct the chaos that birthed it." The weaver spoke for hours, not in the language of men or law, but in parables of boundary, measure, and historical theft. She confirmed that the old timber ridge was not haunted by fiends, but governed by something far more absolute, a demand for geometric truth. We committed the sin of imprecision, she explained, rocking slowly. We placed Trail 17 where the true line should have run. The land demands an ordered sacrifice to acknowledge the sin. The forest does not want you to erase the path. It wants you to certify the truth and restore the measure. The surveyor realized the horrifying truth of his task. He was not an auditor exposing a crime. He was a penitent seeking atonement for a foundational, systemic sin. To break the cycle, he had to perform two contradictory acts using his own craft. First, he had to physically destroy the lie of the illegal trail. And second, he had to create a new, true record of the cost, sanctioned by his own ultimate commitment. With the heavy winter snow beginning to blanket the mountains, the surveyor returned to Trail 17. His tools, the axe, the brass measure, the compass, were now his instruments of penance. He worked in a silence far deeper than the towns, isolated by the immediate, overwhelming storm. His task was meticulous and grueling. Using his hands and a rusted pickaxe, he had to physically log the path. He tore out the iron spikes and faded paint markers of the illegal boundary, dug up the frozen roots of the trees that had been illegally removed decades prior, and used his surveying chains to meticulously remeasure and remark the true, legal boundary line, the line that should have been followed from the beginning. He worked not as a surveyor, but as a scribe of the earth, using his physical tools to write a long, painful confession into the frozen soil. The surveyor fought against the mounting snow and the relentless, suffocating pressure from the woods. The trees seemed to lean in, ancient and accusing, and the cold deepened unnaturally, leeching the very purpose from his spirit. He knew the force of perfect order was watching him now, waiting for his failure to meet its exact measure. He reached the fifth and final spot marked on the old linen maps, the place where the last victims had vanished. Here, the ground was unnaturally frozen, the air utterly still. He knew the 17-year cycle was reaching its absolute, final hour. He felt the overwhelming, crushing presence of the forest's order descend upon him. It was a pressure that demanded the payment, the acknowledgement, the exaction. The surveyor knew he could not stop the demand, but he could change the currency. He pulled out his final field journal, bound in dark leather. He tore out the only documents that mattered to his modern identity, his official land commission papers, his travel authorization, and his personal silver locket, all the proof of his personal history and chaos. He took the rusted spikes and chains of the illegal markers and meticulously laid them in a precise, geometric 17-sided shape on the frozen ground, exactly where the victims had been taken. In the perfect center of that shape, he placed his journal and his torn personal effects. Then, the surveyor did the final, sacrificial act. He wrapped his logging chain around the last, deepest stump of the illegal path and began to pull and hack, creating a permanent, raw, gaping hole in the earth where the path had been. He buried his personal identity under the upturned, frozen soil. The old timber ridge accepted the final reckoning. It was the perfect, structured destruction of the evidence of the crime and the complete sacrifice of the personal memory of the one who corrected it. In the cold, muddy spring of 1889, when the thaw finally came and the mountain relinquished its secrets, the surveyor was discovered. He was found walking along a remote territorial road, miles from the ridge, stumbling out of the dense pine scrub. He was physically unharmed, dressed in clothes that were shredded and stained by the long weeks of cold penance, and carrying only a rusted chain and a small, damaged axe. When questioned by the local sheriff and a representative from the Land Commission, both men of little formal education, the surveyor spoke with an unnerving, perfect clarity. He recalled the precise geometric coordinates of the true, legal boundary lines of the territory. He recited the minute financial history of the Black Peak Syndicate's fraudulent land claims, listing every deed and every cover-up. He could articulate the logic of the 17-year cycle of loss and the geometric layout of the reckoning he had performed at the dead center of the missing Trail 17. But when asked his own name, his home in the East, or any detail about the small silver locket he had possessed, he could offer only a terrifying void. He was a living, breathing, UN-corrupted data point, nothing more than the sum of the facts he had internalized. The price he paid was the erasure of his subjectivity, the warmth, the chaos, the individual story that defines a man. He was now a being of pure function. Harrow Valley, upon hearing of his return and his subsequent amnesia, responded with a silence that was profound and complex. They had watched their ancestor, the patriarch, pay the exaction with the lives of others. They had now watched the Surveyor pay the price with the sacrifice of his own soul. They saw the terrible success of his act. He had not exposed them, he had absolved them. He had created the perfect, geometric atonement that the land required. They were free of the recurring murder, but they were now eternally indebted to the price he paid. The Land Commission, utterly confused by the perfect, meticulous detail of his technical reports combined with his total personal amnesia, eventually dismissed his disappearance as an extreme case of mountain delirium. The Surveyor, stripped of all personal ties and memory, was given a new, arbitrary name and placed in a distant infirmary, where he lived out his days as a man of quiet, unwavering, mechanical routine. The physical evidence of the Surveyor's act was undeniable. Trail 17 was gone. Where the line of sin had been carved, there was now a raw, scarred hollow in the earth that the forest would not dare to reclaim. The true, legal boundary line was marked with uncompromising accuracy, down to the last link of his chain measure. The chaos had been destroyed, replaced by order. With the destruction of the illegal path, the silent covenant, the terrible agreement between the settlement and the land, lost its function. The land's demand for a recurring sacrifice ceased. The old timber ridge was satisfied. Its order had been meticulously restored, and the original sin acknowledged with perfect, geometric precision. But the price of this perfect peace was not just the Surveyor's identity. It was the entire framework of the community's shared guilt. Harrow Valley did not lose its money immediately, but it lost its collective spirit. The town realized two truths that were colder than any winter. The loss of shared purpose. The recurring sacrifice had been a terrible, communal confession that protected their inherited wealth. Now that the cycle was broken, the unpaid debt of their original crime, the corruption of their founding, suddenly loomed large, unacknowledged and unforgiven by anyone but the land itself, the internal decay. They saw in the Surveyor what true obedience cost. He achieved the peace the ridge desired, but he was left a hollow shell. The moral fabric, the shared silence that had once bound them together, fractured. The descendants of the Black Peak Syndicate, no longer united by the necessity of the demand, began to turn on each other, arguing bitterly over the division of inherited assets and the true guilt of their ancestors. The settlement did not collapse dramatically. It simply began to wither. The prosperity remained, but the vitality of the communal secret, the powerful, dark force that had held them together for generations, was gone. The younger generations, sensing the heavy, sterile atmosphere of forced peace, began to leave for the burgeoning cities, unwilling to live in a place that was merely the perfect geometric solution to an ancient crime. Today, the ridge is silent. The 17-year cycle never returned. The forest is quieter, its presence less demanding, its order utterly restored. But if you are a surveyor or an archivist, you can still find the evidence left by the Surveyor. If you can hike deep into the ridge, you will find a small, unnatural hollow in the earth where Trail 17 once ran. And if you dig there, you might find the rusted remnants of the illegal markers and chains, fused into a single, complicated 17-sided mass, buried under the restored, silent soil, a tombstone for the town's original sin. And the silence of Harrow Valley is different now. It is no longer the strong, defiant silence of a town protecting a secret. It is the weak, hollow silence of a place that has been absolved of its sin, but not its shame. The Surveyor, the man who knew everything about the land but nothing about himself, paid the ultimate exaction to prove a point, that some ancient evils are not defeated by passion, but by perfect, meticulous obedience to the rules of order that they themselves impose. It has been 17 years since the Surveyor paid his final price. The physical evidence of his sacrifice, the 17-sided burial site, has never been touched by the people of Harrow Valley. They are too paralyzed by fear and the weight of their profound debt to disturb the spot where the perfect reckoning occurred. Though the cycle of human sacrifice is broken, the town continues its slow, internal decay, preserved only by the lingering inertia of the syndicate's wealth. In the summer of 1905, the year the cycle would have demanded its next victim, a new figure arrived in Harrow Valley. She was the granddaughter of the weaver, a young woman named Eleanor, whom the locals immediately called the cartographer. She was driven not by official law, but by an ancestral memory of the geometric sin. She returned to the ridge to finally clear the last, small tract of land still legally held by the weaver's line. The cartographer sought out the true boundary line marked by the surveyor, a line so precise and cold it seemed alien to the chaotic mountain landscape. Following this line led her straight to the raw, scarred hollow in the earth where Trail 17 once lay. There, she found the grim monument, the 17-sided shape, built from the rusted spikes of the old, illegal boundary. It was a vacuum of order. As she approached the site, she felt the same suffocating pressure that the surveyor had faced. The ridge was no longer demanding blood. It was demanding perpetual perfection. The cartographer realized the surveyor's act had not created freedom. It had bound the land to a new, stricter form of servitude, an eternal defense against chaos and imprecision. Driven by a sense of historical duty, she began to dig at the center of the monument. She did not find the remains of any lost soul, but rather the surveyor's final field journal, the one containing the perfect, final measurements, sealed by the frozen earth and stained with the cold residue of his sacrifice. When she opened the book, the pages were filled with meticulous, angular calculations, but scrawled over the final entry, in the surveyor's mechanical hand just before his mind vanished, was a simple, chilling message. The reckoning is not final until the last chaos is corrected. The cartographer understood the land's new demand. The surveyor had succeeded in breaking the cycle of sacrifice, but he had unknowingly established a new, quieter cycle of maintenance. The ridge now required a constant, vigilant dedication to order to prevent the re-emergence of the original sin, which was chaos itself. The surveyor's cold, perfect logic was now the guardian spirit of the ridge, and the notebook she held was its key. Eleanor, the cartographer, never left the valley. She was bound not by the fear of the exaction, but by the overwhelming moral weight of the surveyor's perfect memory, forever committed to maintaining the geometric truth against the slow, creeping chaos of the natural world. She became the new keeper of the boundary, trapped in the chilling perfection of the man who sacrificed his soul. The new cycle began, silent and absolute. The town remained, fading, under the watchful, logical eye of its self-appointed guardian, forever paying the price in spirit and stagnation. The cartographer spent the next 17 years in Harrow Valley. She occupied the surveyor's old shack, driven by the cold, overwhelming clarity of his final journal. She became the perfect replacement, walking the true boundary lines daily with a heavy brass compass and a newly measured chain, checking the geometric truth against the forest's slow, persistent decay. Her life had shrunk to the discipline of the line, her personality fading into the meticulous ritual of maintenance. The residents, noting the new, vigilant figure, accepted her as the latest necessary cost of their hollow peace. As the second full 17-year cycle since the surveyor's sacrifice approached its end in 1922, the cartographer felt the pressure intensify. She had protected the boundary flawlessly, yet the forest's silence felt fragile, like a highly pressurized chamber waiting for the smallest puncture. One late autumn evening, while checking the area around the 17-sided burial site, she noticed a subtle flaw, the return of chaos. A single, young maple, driven by the unyielding will of nature, had managed to sprout its roots directly into the perimeter of the buried markers. Its root structure was beginning to push against the cold, eye-infused geometry of the surveyor's atonement, threatening to introduce imprecision into the perfect work. The cartographer, guided by the Surveyor's logic, knew what she had to do. The maple represented the last chaos that he had scribbled about. She brought her axe and a shovel, ready to excise the tree and restore the order. But as she raised the axe, poised to strike, she looked not at the chaotic root, but at the reflection of her own face in the polished steel of the blade. For the first time in 17 years, the image was not blank. There was a sudden, sharp flicker of something human, a memory of her own name, her own home, and a terror of becoming the same hollow function as the Surveyor. She understood the true horror of his price. He didn't just pay an exaction. He created a trap of perfect dehumanization. The order, the cartographer realized, was just as absolute and destructive as the chaos it replaced. The ridge required either death, the original exaction, or mindless perfection, the Surveyor's maintenance. Both were payments that destroyed the human spirit. Instead of cutting the chaotic pine, she turned her axe toward the true, legal boundary marker that the Surveyor had painstakingly placed nearby, the marker defining the very beginning of the perfect line. She struck it once, hard. The blow was purely symbolic, yet enough to introduce a minute, non-geometric error into the sacred boundary. The immediate effect was devastating. The silent, heavy pressure of the woods lifted instantly, replaced by a sudden rush of sound. The normal wind, the loud snap of dry leaves, the raucous call of a crow. The absolute order was shattered. The cartographer felt her own personality rush back, a chaotic, wonderful flood of memory, fear, and desire. The Surveyor's cold logic vanished from her mind. She wept, finally, powerfully free. But the ridge did not forgive the intentional transgression. The cycle of the sacrifice was over, replaced by a cycle of truth and consequence. When the residents of Harrow Valley woke up the next morning, they were greeted not by a disappearance, but by an unsettling, profound sense of exposure. The geometric fault introduced by the cartographer did not demand a life, it demanded honesty. Within a week, the decades-old financial ledgers of the Black Peak Syndicate, which documented the fraud and the covenant of silence, were mysteriously discovered and made public by an unnamed source. The original sin, the theft and the corruption, was finally exposed to the world, triggering criminal investigations, massive financial liabilities, and the immediate, public collapse of Harrow Valley's prosperity. The ridge was finally free. It no longer demanded death or inhuman order. It demanded justice, and it got it. The cartographer vanished into the newly turbulent world. Harrow Valley, the entire legal and financial structure built on the foundation of a lie, was destroyed. The syndicate's wealth was stripped, the families disgraced, and the land was reclaimed by the government, reverting to raw, chaotic wilderness. The final reckoning was paid not in blood or mind, but in structural existence. Warning: this video contains purely fictional supernatural horror content. The events, characters, and concepts depicted are products of imagination and are not intended to promote, endorse, or normalize any harmful or illegal activities, including child abuse, sexualization, or self-harm.